All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today we're at Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I happen to be at a tattoo museum of all places. And this place is really quite interesting. I am with Jay, and you guys are going to learn that Loren has no idea about anything about tattoos, but Jay's going to get me informed, and hopefully you also. I've seen some of his work on the internet, and he does an awesome job with the tattoos. The artwork is just amazing. But Jay's going to take us through here and get us started, and we're going to learn about tattooing today.
Right.
Okay, Jay, how long have you been in the tattoo business?
I've been in the tattoo trade for 34 years now.
Oh, is that all?
Started out back in 1986, yeah.
Wow.
Just a little while.
Just a little while.
Yeah.
And you started this museum?
I started the museum about a decade ago. I was actually, at the time I was down in Moscow, Idaho, which is where the University of Idaho is. And what I had taken my collection of, I'd been collecting stuff for years and years and years and piling it up in boxes and whatnot. And my wife would always ask me, why the hell do you have all this stuff? And well, you can see why now. But I decided that in my shop there that I would get it all out into the open so people could see it and put it on display, and that's kind of where the museum started. And then of course I have a passion for history, and we're at that point where tattoo history for a long time was all passed down from one generation to the next, all unspoken. Nobody really wrote anything down. So here in the last 20 years, I would say 15, 20 years, people have started to take more interest in the history and preserving it and whatnot. So you have collectors who have large collections of stuff, and then you have the museums, which are folks like me who want to share it with everybody. So.
And you were saying that there aren't many museums. You're the only one kind of on the West Coast?
Well, the Northwest.
In the Northwest.
There's probably 6, 7 on the West Coast. Altogether, I think that the Tattoo Archive recognizes about 25 tattoo museums. And there's new ones that are starting, here and there. It seems like more and more. And the cool thing is they're starting to go like by state or region, so it's like, I think one of the goals of a lot of, I know the Tattoo Archive, as well as a lot of museum owners, is that it would be really neat to see a tattoo museum in every state, and then that way you could go from state to state. And he actually took the one down off of his website. It's probably because he's putting another one together, but he had like a tattoo road trip across America map.
Really?
You could actually, like, if you wanted to plan a trip to go to tattoo museums, you could. The problem was it was real heavy on the east side of the country and very light on the west side. So yeah, once you there's tons of them once you pass the on the other side of the Mississippi River, but on this side of the Mississippi, there's not so many. So.
And you said he took that down off of his website?
But it goes up and down as I imagine it might be up there again. Last time I looked, it was down because I know he was adding more names to the deal. So,
okay. Do you know what the website is?
Oh, it's just the tattooarchive.com.
Tattoo Archive. Okay.
Yeah, and
so if somebody's
great,
interested in touring tattoo museums, that's
that would
the way
be a place
to
to get an idea. The other thing about Tattoo Archive that's really cool is they have an online history section. So it's not like doesn't cover every bit of tattoo history, but it's kind of an A to Z that you can go through, and you can actually see different bits about different people in tattoo history and tattoo over the years. And then also they have an extensive bookstore available as well. So they have a lot of books, that can be bought, on the subject of tattooing. Specifically, so either supply companies or specific characters in the trade, times, areas. It covers a lot of different stuff. I've actually considered getting together with him and putting a big section right over there for books for sale that are
Oh.
on. So when people come in, they can actually, like you would at most museums, flip
Right,
through some
yeah.
material and go, hey, how much is this one? And
At the gift shop.
yeah, at the gift shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And people can probably hear in the background we've got a buzzing going on because somebody's getting a tattoo right
actually
now.
getting tattooed. Yeah.
And so you're using some sort of an electric.
Yeah.
Explain that process if you can.
Well, when tattooing first came about, which goes back to probably 10,000 years ago, everything was done in basically up until modern times, which we say electricity.
Okay.
So before that, tattooing was either done by pushing, poking, or tapping. So basically, it was either pushed in with a series of pins and kind of pushed in one dot at a time.
And they would use an ink or a charcoal or
a carbon-based ink,
Okay.
mostly. So you know, in the really old days, I'm sure it was spit, water, and charcoal.
Okay.
You know, that's what they would use traditionally. But it varied from area to area and culture to culture. But so there was the poking, and then there was the pushing, which was the method that the Japanese used, and where it was more of the needles were affixed to a long haft, and they were actual needles as opposed to the poking aspect of it. Could be thorns, it could have been needles, it could have been, you know, depending on time period and culture and all that.
And what would be the advantage to the pushing over the poking?
They're very similar, but the Japanese got it down to more of a fine art, and with the movement of the tool and everything, they could work much faster.
Okay.
And so and then the tapping, which is the where that word tattoo actually came from, which was tatau, and it was from the Polynesian islands, Borneo, and all those areas like that, Pacific islands. They would actually have a haft with a kind of a rake deal on it that had
Okay.
shark's teeth or thorns or fish bones or whatever, and then it would almost look like a rake. And then they would have a stick to tap with, and they would dip that rake tool into the ink, and then they would tap, 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 and it would move the tool, and it would leave lines as they went. And so very big in Polynesian culture and all that. It's the way they still do it to this day. Well, they do use modern electric stuff as well, but and so do the Japanese, and then they do half of it one way, half of the other. So that was pretty much, those were the methods. There were other forms of body modification. They did some cultures had sewing, where they actually took thread and a needle and they ran ink and then sewed underneath the skin, which I think would be very, very difficult to do, but they did it. You know, so but I would consider that more of a body modification than a tattoo, because a tattoo to me is ink that's been implanted into the skin, you know, via being pushed in by needles, I guess.
And how deep do you need to go into the skin? Do you go down into the muscle at all?
No,
or is it just
no,
in
we
the
don't.
top
We stay in the
skin?
dermal layer of the skin, so that's we don't go what they call subcutaneous, so we don't go below the fat layer, and actually we don't even go into the fat layer. We stay in there's a upper layer of your skin, which is the epidermis, which is the layers of skin that is constantly dying and sloughing off. And then you have the dermal layer of skin, which is where the tattoo pigment is put in, and that's the living skin tissue right there. That's your actual living skin cells. How tattoos work is the pigment particles are small enough to be able to be pushed into the skin, but too big to be rejected or ingested.
Okay,
And
so
which
they
doesn't make a lot of sense.
just stay right there in that one spot.
They stay in that one layer of your skin, and that's where they reside. And so your body will ingest a little bit of it or reject a little bit of it, but not much, because those particles are too big for them to go anywhere. They're locked in there. And because skin has elasticity, that's a hard one to say. When the needle goes into the skin, it pushes it in, pushes the pigment in, and then when the needle comes out, it actually snaps, the skin snaps back, and so it implants that pigment particle into that living tissue. So it's there with your living skin for the rest of your life. And so, that being said, that's why you see older tattoos, maybe 40, 50 years old, that have kind of, the lines look like they've spread out and they're just not quite as crisp and clean as they used to be. And it happens to pretty much all tattoos. And that's because your skin cells grow for the rest of your life constantly. And so we all get old, we get a little wrinkly, the skin gets a little, thinner and all that, and so with the movement of your skin cells, the pigment itself moves as well.
So when you're considering getting a tattoo, it's good to get one that's going to look good when you get old.
Yeah. You want to take that into consideration, absolutely.
Does the tattoo artist know which ones are going to be most usually, effective that way?
And actually, I mean, I wouldn't say everyone does, but I mean, Richard gave us the nickname of the old folks home one time because everybody who's tattooing here has got over 25 years or more of experience, and we're all over 50. So, but we always take that in consideration when we're tattooing somebody, that if like lettering is a perfect example. If the lettering is too small and too tight, it's going to turn into blobs. You know, I tell people that's not going to last. It might look good for 10 years and then it's going to go, you know, it's going to fade, it's going to bleed together or whatever. So a lot of times when people are getting tattoos, we try to point them in the right direction, you know, because we have that experience, you know.
Right.
When you've got 25 years or more under your belt, you've been around long enough to see what something looks like in 15 years, you know, or so, even on your own body. So,
right.
You know, it kind of helps. And then that way you can, you know, make sure the customers are getting a good quality piece that is going to last them a lifetime and not turn to mush. So, but I don't know if everybody goes that far. I mean, some people might say, well, just, hey, that's what you want, let's do it, kind of thing. And you have to do that within, you know, a certain amount of reason, but, you know, there's a point where you can kind of draw a line and say, hey, you know, this might not last, or, you know, that won't work in the future.
But once you've done that, it's kind of up to them to decide what they really
want.
And then,
yeah. It's like the thing I do with names. I'll the tattoo names on people, but the first thing I always tell them is the only names you should ever get tattooed on you is lost loved ones and family members.
Not your recent girlfriend?
No. Well, because your lost loved ones will always be your lost loved ones, and your relatives, your family members, even if they disown you, you're still related to them. They're still your family members. So girlfriends, boyfriends, husbands, wives, those things tend to change, and we've seen tons of it and covered a lot of it up over the years. So I always tell people, you know, that's how I start off, you know, and I tell them that's what you should get. And I tell them again, second, oh no, I want it. And then the second time comes around, I give them another shot, and I say, well, you know, oftentimes, you know, tattoos are permanent, relationships are not, you know, so.
Well, now, can you erase a tattoo?
Not with an eraser. I've got a razor blade over here that might work. I got a straight razor over there. We got sandpaper in the back.
Those all sound real nice.
They have laser removal, but yeah, they're pretty permanent. Yeah, there's not really much getting them out except for laser removal. There was some back in the day. They would tattoo acids and different things like that into the skin. They would do dermabrasion, which is really hardcore, things like that to remove tattoos. So there's another reason not to get your girlfriend's name on you. You know, and then you know, after I kind of get them 3 times, you know, are you sure? And they say yeah, and then I'm just like, okay, whatever.
Well, yeah, if that's what they want, that's what you do.
That's what you want, but I'm going to try to steer you away from mistakes I've seen in the past. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Now, are people allergic to the ink at all, or is this actually really quite safe? And what about the regulation part?
These days it's pretty safe, because like if you go back years, inks have changed considerably over the years. You know, in early on, you know, black was probably the safest color. Tattooers experimented with inks and pigments to see what would work and what wouldn't. Some reds were mercurial reds, so they actually, the skin rejected them and caused the skin to bubble up and whatnot. I mean, there's been everything from, you know, you name it has been tried for a pigment. You know, watercolor paints, Higgins ink, I mean, just all kinds of stuff. So in the beginning they found black, and then there was basically 3 colors that worked: red, green, and yellow. And red was iffy, so there was a lot more reaction to red as time went on. Now the Japanese, on another part of the world, were, you know, and this is, had their pigments perfected and knew what was in tattoo pigment, you know, what worked well for colors and all that. So at some point, a couple of tattooers kind of made a connection with the Japanese part of tattooing kind of brought those two, you know, electric American tattooing and Japanese tattooing kind of together and traded some secrets and whatnot. And so then the color thing opened up. A lot of the pigments nowadays are all cosmetic grade, you know, pigments and whatnot. So they're really high standard as far as all that's concerned. Whereas in the old days, you might be a little iffy about what's good and what's bad. There was a point in time where, like I said, there was 3 colors, then there was 5, you know, then there was like 7. 7 was a big deal if you had 7 colors, you know, because you had a nice broad spectrum. Now there's probably 140 different, I mean, there's companies out there that you can buy 40, 50 different shades of you know, a palette, big palette set.
Wow.
So that you don't have to mix this color and that color to make this color. You don't have to lighten or darken anything. It's already set up for you. So, and some guys really like to have 100 different, you know, bottles of color, and then there are guys that are more traditional that have, you know, might only have 14 colors or 15 colors, you know. And then I myself am like that, and then I mix, you know, one color with another color and all that, and actually make different tones and hues that way, as opposed to having a pre-mixed color. But these days colors are safe. They're really safe. And they stay bright, you know, for a long time. They really last, which is cool.
Yeah.
But that for a long time was experimentation. It really was. I think until they started getting into cosmetic colorings and whatnot, things like that for lipsticks and rouges and stuff like that, those types of pigments, it was a trial and error thing. And a guy would find something that worked real good, and then that's what he would use. And he might give the secret to one person, and he might not. And you know, it's still to this day, ink is one of the mysteries, the deep, dark secrets in tattooing that nobody really divulges the true recipes and art, you know, for. It's one of the last of the deep, dark secrets, you know, that's out there. And because it's already ready, pre-mixed and available, not many people mix colors from powders anymore. I still do, but I own a museum. I got to kind of hold on to some of the old school,
Right.
and that's how I was taught. So, but the pigments, actually, since you asked about them, start out as an actual powder, and this kind of gives you an idea there. They're just more like a, I would say like a dye or something like that. That's what the powders, you know, a lot of times that's what they look like. But,
Okay, and now what we're looking at here is a display case that has several different pigments. He's got probably 15 or 20 different colors.
Yep.
Are most of these are powders, right?
Well, they're actually pre-mixed inks.
Okay.
And but they start out as powders, and that's why I have the powders in there.
And then what do they mix them with?
Now there's a broad range there. You don't know, the word proprietary is in there, so you can.
You using stuff like water, or
mainly.
or do you get into like acetones and stuff?
No. Well, I hope not. I mean, who knows? That's one of the reasons why I do my own make my own pigments, is because I know for a fact what's in them. And what's in the standard ingredients is like an ethyl alcohol, so triple distilled vodka, something along those lines. You know, a clear grain alcohol, something along those lines, to kind of dissolve, be a solvent for the pigment. And then there's usually sterilized water, distilled water, glycerin, and then oftentimes something like witch hazel or something like that will be thrown into it. And that's like the basic old school. There's 5 components to it.
Well, now with the alcohol and stuff in it, does the tattoo ink burn when it goes in?
No, it's such a small amount that it's not.
I just know when you stick alcohol on a cut, it about sends you.
Yeah, it burns like
we
hell.
call that hand sanitizer Cut Finder 100.
Yeah.
Because you got a cut on your finger and you put that sanitizer on, you know right where it is.
Yeah, I found that one out. Yes. But no, it's not. It doesn't. There's so little, like, you know, there's so little of it that it's not enough to burn. Now, if the tattoo artist was to spray you down with alcohol after tattooing you, that would hurt like hell. But the ink itself isn't.
And when you're
Actually,
tattooing, does it mess up the skin? I mean, does your skin kind of trashed and scab over, or what happens when they're poking all these holes?
Well, when it's They heal kind of if they're healed properly, if the person takes care of them the right way, and the tattoo artist isn't a butcher, which could be part of the deal. You never know, because some tattooers are rough and some are, everybody's got a different hand to it. Some are heavier than others. But it really comes down to aftercare a lot of times. If the person takes care of the tattoo properly, it shouldn't scab up, except for maybe a mild, like very thin layer, and then it usually will flake off like a sunburn does. So it's.
And what do you mean take care of it?
Keep
Vitamin
it clean using a good fragrance-free hand lotion, keeping it out of the sun, which is hard here, I'm sure, for people to stay out of the lakes and streams and swimming pools and hot tubs and all that for a couple of weeks, and just kind of basic common sense things. But the two big ones is keeping it clean and properly moisturized, not over moisturized, not under, so there's all these factors that can come into play. I had a guy one time come in and he says, he came back after 2 weeks I tattooed him, and he came back and he's like, my tattoo's all messed up, and it was just all gnarly, and this is when I was down in Moscow, and it was just all gnarly and just scabbed up and just really gross and all that, and I looked at it and I said, what did you do to it? And he kind of gave me a blank look for a second, and he goes, oh, well, the day after I got it done, we went camping down at the river, and and I went, yeah, we went camping, huh? And I said, they have a shower there? And he's like, well, no, but we were in the river. And I said, well, do you remember the part about me saying no, lakes, swimming pools, hot tubs, rivers, creeks, streams? And then I've added now ponds, swamps, marshes, wading pools, water slides, etc. So, I mean, he didn't take care of the tattoo properly, so it didn't heal, right? So a lot of it is in the if it's applied properly, once we're done, then it's in the hands of the person who gets the tattoo itself. So, yeah. So
okay.
We kind of got off on a tangent there from how tattoos happened.
Well, this is all news to me. Right. Like I said, I have no clue.
So just maybe to jump back to I was talking about the different methods. In about the 1850s, because you're hearing it in the background, the tattooing going on.
Right.
You mentioned that. In the mid 1800s, there were a few inventions that came about that, with the advent of electricity, that changed the face of tattooing completely. Because before it was poked, pushed, or tapped in. Very basic methods, not a lot of technology behind that, And so then in the 1830s, they came out with the electromagnetic coils, and by the mid to late 1830s, they had started to work on the door buzzer doorbell principle. Okay. And by the 1840s, they actually had patented a doorbell mechanism, and the doorbell mechanism basically had two electromagnetic coils in line with an armature bar, and basically you hit the power and it would make the bar go up and down that you used to push a needle up and down into a handpiece, and then the ink was put on that way, and it went so much faster because something like that will do 90, 100 cycles per second, whereas then you can only get in how many taps as your pokes that you can within a second's time. So it made things go a lot faster. Well, somebody got smarter along the way and adapted one of these instruments. And there's an argument, was it the doorbell mechanism or was it the Edison stencil pen? So in 1876, Thomas Edison came up with a autographic stencil pen. And I've got a patent picture over here that I could show you of it. And basically what it was a reciprocating, it was almost like an engraver. And so it had a point that went up and down real fast. Well, some tattoo artists went, wow, I attach needles to that. And, hot damn, I've got something that I can work with just like a pen. And the early tattoo machines, they even said it's just like using a pen and all that. So that's where the advent of electric tattooing came in. So somewhere between the 1850s, either with, if my theory about the doorbell mechanism is right, and people have, and it's been historically shown, I mean, there are tattoo machines that have been converted from doorbell mechanisms, and the principles are damn near the same. But but we don't have any dates or anything to put on them because at some point in history, I mean, you didn't have business licenses. They didn't have photographs in newspapers. So you got a newspaper, it was a sketch or a drawing.
Right.
So if you got a, picture of some guy tattooing and it's some little tiny thing in the corner and it's like a rough sketch and who knows what he's got in his the tattooer's got in his hand. Tattoo art shops were hidden in barber shops and back alleys and on ships and things like that at a certain point in time too. So it's really hard to peg that exact. Was it this instrument or was it this instrument? And they tie it to the Edison because a guy named Sam O'Reilly in 1891 invented a handpiece that he patented that was called the first tattooing device, and it had the motor off of an Edison stencil pen on it.
Okay.
So that was one thing that led to that. And then the other thing is there are a couple of pictures, sketches and whatnot, showing O'Reilly actually using an Edison stencil pen type device for tattooing. But then another guy came along, Elmer Getchell, about the same time, and he had one that was more like the doorbell mechanism. So there's no real hard, hey, this was the day, this was the the instrument that was used that made that big change in tattooing, but it was an electrical instrument that just changed because you could take a tattoo that would take you 3 hours to do and do it in 45 minutes because you had electricity pushing it and you had those needle punctures were 100 times more than what you were able to do per second.
Right.
And so you could get a lot more ground covered. You could attach multiple needles to it to be able to put more ink in a larger space, larger area. So that's kind of where it made the crossover, I think. Went from the three basic methods to what we have now, which is modern electric tattooing. And I guess you can say it's still modern because if you go back to the 1850s for electric tattooing, I mean, that's still not very, it's 170 years, so
right.
It's not very old, but in the same sense, tattooing is really rich with history. And then I think I was saying before, not until recently have people actually been writing stuff down and grabbing stuff from collections and putting it together and trying to find as much information as they can about the person. And sometimes they just find 20 sheets of the guy's design sheets and a few of his tools and whatnot, and can get a little story here and there and everything, and they put a book together and it has as much information as there is available because this guy's dead, and the people that knew stories of him are either dead or the stories have gotten watered down so much that they're or they're complete unknowns. You never know on that one. But and so people have started putting books together, and if they would have done that 30, 40 years ago, boy, I'll tell you what, we'd have some really neat history written down. But
well, tattooing's kind of become a big thing in the last 10, 15, 20 years?
I'd say it started when I got into tattooing. It was still for bikers, sailors, and women of low moral character, military, that kind of thing.
Right.
You didn't. Your common person going into a tattoo shop, they were still scary and all that. And they were just most people got tattoos. You didn't see a lot of lawyers and whatnot, although they did get tattooed. Doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people. But it was more common that it was bikers, sailors, women of low moral character. I have a bumper sticker. I have collections of business cards and stickers and all kinds of stuff like that. I have a bumper sticker in the collection that actually says tattoos not just for sailors and whores anymore. And so
was it more of an underground type art for a lot of years, or
up until probably
I know a lot, like you said, sailors. I know that people went into the military and they'd come back out with tattoos of an anchor or a naked lady or something.
Sometimes people would just get one little tattoo, as carnivals traveled through towns and stuff like that. The carnival tattooer would tattoo them, or if they were close to in a big city or close to a military port or base or whatever, there were tattooers there. But there's been tattoo shops, going all the way back to the turn of the century, or the 20th century. So in the late 1800s and then into the early 1900s, I mean, there were tattoo shops. Most of them were this was really common up until the 30s and 40s. A lot of shops were in the back of barber shops or arcades or.
Well, I think the
places
barber
like that.
shops back in the day, they did bloodletting and they did,
They did
all kinds.
of
I
stuff.
mean, they
Yeah,
were
yeah.
kind of the doctor too.
I was reading about one place that they had the tattoo place was at the back of a 4-chair barber shop with the shine station and the whole 9 yards. So you could walk in the door, you could get your shoes, buffed and shined, you could get a haircut, and then all the way in the back you could go get a tattoo. So
Okay.
But things, places, shops and stuff like that started really coming out. I would say tattoo shops were big in the advent of the wars, like World War I. Tattoo shops were big. There were lots of tattooers all over the place. So you had them all around the military bases and whatnot. And then you had the carnival circuit, which is a way that there were a lot of tattooers that were on that route too. And a lot of those were tattoo attractions. So
Okay.
they would be a husband and wife team. There was this team, Duffy and Stella Grassman, and they both tattooed, and Stella was the tattooed lady. So, she brought business, and then she actually did it herself. And then at one point they actually settled down, and when they got off of the carnival circuit, they settled down in Philadelphia for a while and tattooed there. And there's quite a story about them. They separated at one point, and then they actually remained friends and were buried right next to each other in the end, even though they went separate ways. I'm rambling off. Sometimes I do that.
No, that's fine. One of the first things I see when I walk in here is lots of art all over your walls. Now, are these stencils something that you put on somebody?
Yeah,
and then you go ahead and tattoo from the stencil?
Well,
or do you draw it on, or just what's the process there?
The design sheets are a lot of them are production sheets, or they're hand-drawn stuff that's done by artists themselves or us or whatever. But a lot of it, the stuff you see is like over here is all production flash, and on that big wall there. Artists would do design sheets, and then they would sell them to other artists, and then that way you could get different art from different people on the wall. And it was called flash, and that's what it's still to this day is, they call it flash. And the reason for that is I've heard several stories. The one is the more of it you had on the wall, the more color and stuff it was, the flashier your shop was.
Right.
So it just kind of got cut down to being called flash. Another one that I was told was they would take the design sheets and they would have rivets in them. Like you can see them on these right here on the corners. They were taped off and had rivets in them.
Okay.
See how that has the rivets in
Right.
the corners? And so what would happen is, and this one has it too, and what would happen is they would put rivets in all their sheets mounted on boards, and then they would tie them together with wire or leather lacing or whatever, and then they would, when they got to the town that the carnival was at for the week or whatever, they would set up their booth, and then they would hang the sheets down off of the top of the booth deal, and then they would work, and when it was time to pack up, they'd just pull the sheets down and they would just fold right up into a little stack.
Okay.
And they could take them down in a flash and then move on to the next town. So, those are the two.
Were they able to use these? Are those canvas? They look like they're canvas.
They're actually mounted on board. It's like a watercolor paper.
And so how did they get that from there to your skin, or does the artist just freelance from that?
There were guys who were freehand art, and still to this day, people who could draw right on the skin. I had a friend of mine just here recently, Judy Parker, and she's been tattooing since like 1978, and she's an awesome illustrator, an awesome artist. She draws it right on the skin. There's a guy who works with us here, Robert McNeil, the real old folk of the old folks home. He's been tattooing over 40 some odd years.
Wow.
And I think he just turned 69. And Robert's one of those, masters that can draw right on the skin and, all that, is able to do that kind of stuff and just really pull it off beautifully. But the way the design sheets, and I guess the best way to explain it is what they did in the beginning. You had to be able to draw it right on, and then they came up with the acetate and the celluloid stencils, which are these guys right here.
Okay.
Which is just basically a piece of plastic or acetate. Before that it was celluloid, but that was before the advent of the plastics, acetate. And it would be put over the design, and then you would take a cutter, which was basically a scribe, and the outline of the actual stencil would be scribed into the acetate, and it would leave grooves into it.
Okay.
And right here, here's an example of that right here. And you can actually feel the grooves in it. And so you can imagine there's a picture of that from the wall art. And then, like an example here, this rose, you would take a piece of this acetate and put it over top here, and then trace out with the scribe all the lines that you needed in order to put a pattern down on the skin.
That had to have taken an hour or two in and of itself to get the tattoo ready.
It takes as long as it does to actually, do a tracing. Once you got good at it, it would be just like doing a tracing. And what they would do is, and I can actually...
And what we're looking at here is pieces of plastic that are 6 inches square, 3 inches round, 2 inches round, that have different pictures on them that they've set over the top with this clear plastic, or acetate as he calls it, set it over the top of a print, and then they traced it and copied it so that it would be able to transfer to that.
Right. And so every design sheet or every flash sheet would have, for every design on there would be an acetate stencil cut for it.
Wow.
Okay. And so, this is where it got a little more complex. So if you had, say, an eagle design, and he's flying in one direction, well, there were rules. Like, if you got an eagle on this arm, your left arm, you want him flying forward, right? So on that stencil, he would have to point a certain way. Well, if you went to the left arm to put that on, it would be pointing the opposite direction.
Right.
So you either had to do one of two things. You either had to cut 2 acetates, one of it flying one way, one of it flying the other way, so you could put them, and an eagle's an example of one of the things that you want it pointing in the right direction. You want the dragon's head pointing forward, you want the eagle flying forward, that kind of thing. Or some guys, somewhere along the way, I couldn't say who did, figured out you could just flip it over and then recut it on the other side, and then that way you got what they call a double cut, so you could powder the other side. So what would happen on the stencil thing is, and I found my stencil, I can actually, and I love showing people this, and I don't have all the stuff together for it, but here's one of the acetates here, and if I can find it, it's a little easier to explain with one in hand. But what they would do is they would take a powder that was usually made up of charcoal or graphite or both, and the powder would be put onto the stencil itself, would be kind of sprinkled on there, and then it would get rubbed into the grooves, and so the grooves would be full with that stencil powder. You'd knock off the excess, and then the skin was prepped, shaved, and all that, and then just a super thin light coat of Vaseline or something along those lines, hardly any, and then the stencil itself will be put onto the skin and then pushed on hard enough to set that powder on there, and then removed, and it would leave an actual pattern there. The worst part about that was you had to be really good, because once you wiped, that powder was gone. So you had to be really, you had to know how far to go with those lines, and you had to be real careful about the way you wiped and all that. So you had to be a decent tattoo artist or a decent artist, because if that stencil went, you had to wing it. You had to kind of figure out how to get that in there, and all that. So
it was just a transfer of color to the skin, and then you were able to follow that, and you were able to find that.
Just to make an outline, and then all your shading color would be done after the fact. But it gave you something to work off of as a basis. And these were the norm up until the 70s and early 80s. The guy I learned from still used acetate stencils into the mid 80s. But it's kind of funny, because acetate stencils are an outdated technology that was replaced by an outdated technology. And
Okay.
I love the story of this one, and we'll go back over here to this because and you guys will remember this. Some people I put pictures up on this exhibit so that people could see it because not a lot of people remember the Ditto machine.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so somewhere along the way, and I believe this was in the '60s somewhere. I've heard two ways that I've heard it told. Either a tattoo artist, wife, girlfriend, whatever, friend, who knows, did clerical work, was a school teacher, secretary, something along those lines, and made copies with those Ditto machines.
Okay.
Well,
and you're talking about the old ones that dipped in ink and you ran it around with a handle and it
ran
pumped
it
out
out,
the.
yeah. So
that's what they had when I was in school.
Yeah, it was. I remember in the '70s as a kid,
It was before Xerox came out.
The teacher would say, "Okay, you get to come today and help me make the copies," and you'd get to, and all the copy would be all purple, and that would be it. But you just, and they show it in the Christmas Story movie where all the kids smell the paper, and everybody who's old enough to know laughs because we all smelled the paper. And that's what's wrong with me. Maybe I got to go to the office and make copies too many times. That's what happened. But so. That was the thing. And the Thermofax machine that actually made the transfer, which was the Spirit Master, which is this paper here, which, it has a just basic paper, then it has a layer that actually has the pigment on it that's heat sensitive, and then it has another piece of paper that
it's kind of like the old carbon paper.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Very, very similar, but it's heat transferred. And then in the end you get like this here, which is just the image on the white paper, and that was what they used to call the Spirit Master. And then on those Ditto machines, if you remember, it hooked onto that roll right there. It was a full sheet of paper and it hooked onto the roll there, and then the chemical was in there, and it moistened the paper, and then as you rolled it, that chemical made it transfer onto the paper. Well, I heard that, so the one is the wife, girlfriend, clerical work, whatever, school teacher deal. The other one I heard was a tattoo artist friend and client was a janitor at a school, and from picking up all the trash and all this stuff, that purple will get all over you real easy. It doesn't take much to get that purple. I show people every now and then, and it really doesn't take much to get that purple on your fingers. And once it gets on there, it doesn't come off very well. You can see that's just not coming right off. And so somehow they would, what is that? What is that that's sticking to your hands, whatever? What is that stuff? And so I'm sure that janitor or secretary or whatever said, oh, well, it's this, and showed them the process. And then they figured out that, an alcohol-based soap or something along those lines would actually put the transfer onto the skin, and it would stay and it would last much longer. So you could actually get through a whole entire outline and not lose the stencil while you're doing it, not have to worry about if you wiped it off or whatever. So that comes along. Well, during the time that came into tattooing, it was starting to get phased out because, as we all know, in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, the great big copy machines are as big as rooms, started coming out, and you could, at school, the school finally got its first black and white copier. I can remember in the late 70s.
Xerox,
of course. Yeah, big Xerox machine, great big as that display case, bigger.
And then the controversies came with who sat on the machine and took a picture
of their butt. Yeah, that's exactly.
So that was the big controversy back then.
It started phasing these out, and by the 80s, nobody was using these anymore, except for in second and third world countries. Well, by the 90s, they've really been phased out because then color copiers and whatnot. And I remember buying at school auctions and whatnot. I remember buying the Thermomaster machines, and we'd buy them cheap and then turn around and sell them for a good profit. And now I wish I would have kept like a crate load of them, because now they're just, I was getting them for $50 back then and selling them for $250, and now if I would have got them for $50 back then, I could sell them for $1,000 now. So
right.
But anyways, back to the outdated technology. So as time progressed, I don't think they use them in third world countries anymore, because the $39.99 all-in-one printer, copier, scanner things are everywhere. So it's an outdated technology, and the only reason that they make this actual Spirit paper the transfer paper that they used to use for the master copies for those ditto machines. The only reason they make this paper is for tattooing. And if it wasn't for tattooing, all this technology would be something that you would be reading about in a museum.
Well, that's kind of what we're doing.
but you know, I mean, and I have a modern version of the machine over there that does the stencils. But I always find that a really interesting thing, and I love to talk about the stencils when people come in, because it's an outdated technology that was replaced by an outdated technology. And it seems like everything in tattooing has had a root. You know, tattoo artists have been very adaptive. You know, they see something that looks like, hey, this can work, then they'll incorporate it, tinker around, make it work, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, a lot of trial and error. I mean, like I was saying about the inks, I mean,
right.
My adopted dad was a tattoo artist, and we used to go to the hot springs in Bozeman, Montana, where he lived, and I remember sitting in the hot springs with him in his shorts, and he had all these scribbly, scrapey lines, you know, these lines of all these different, some colors that were barely there, and some of them weren't different colors at all, and I asked him about it, and he says, oh, I was trying this new green out, or I was trying this new red out, or whatever. And so if you didn't have somebody to tattoo it on, you just tattoo it on your own leg. So his top of his knees were just all big scribbly spots, and just yeah, it's pretty wild, you know. But
well, so do you got to go to school for this, or is this something that you learn on the job?
It's an apprenticeship thing.
It's an apprenticeship.
Done properly. There's schools now, which, I mean, I kind of am against the schools, because in some states it's a required thing, which, you know, how that happened, I don't know. It's gone nuts. But you can spend a lot of money for a very little amount of training and get a certificate and handshake and sent down the road. 10 grand later, 10 grand and 6 weeks later. Usually a formal tattoo apprenticeship is a 2-year thing.
Right.
Just like any other
trade. Most trades.
Like any other trade, you know, there's an apprenticeship and it lasts a while, and there's, you know, but there's so much more that you can learn hands-on with somebody, you know, day to day, than you can get through a quick, you know, a school session where there's 10 other people or 20 other people, depending on the state or where it is, and, you know, statistically what point in time. I mean, there's become more and more tattooers as time has gone on. You're not getting that one-on-one, you know, deal.
Right.
So I think they're kind of a scam in a sense. And then I think that people get taught the basics, and then just get, you know, here you go, you know, do with it as you will. And they either get in with somebody who kind of takes them under their wing and kind of shows them, or they pay attention, or they practice enough, or whatever, or they wind up selling their equipment on eBay or wherever to whoever, and going and getting a job in some other vocation of some sort. But tattoo's been way hyped up, so there's a lot more of them nowadays. A lot more people doing it nowadays, so thus you have the schools. But the apprenticeship thing is the way, you know, most of us did it. And those are still going. I mean, there's tattoo shops that are still doing apprenticeships. I don't think all of them are doing them quite as well as they used to.
I was going to say, how do you pick a tattoo artist versus a tattoo butcher?
Well, you look at their work.
Right.
That's the first thing I'd say. Look at their work. Second thing is to take a look at the shop, because if the shop's just a total disaster and nasty and all that, it smells like old Budweiser cans, and I got a great story about that if we had time. I mean, I could go on for hours, but, you know, if the place is nasty and the work doesn't look good, then yeah, that's a butcher.
So mostly word of mouth. Just ask your friends
word
that
of
have
mouth is a good way to find
that
out.
You like.
Yeah, word of mouth. Now with social media and all that stuff and Google, you can just go look at reviews, you know, things like that.
Okay.
Sometimes you got to take those with a grain of salt, because sometimes it's just some vindictive, you know, friend of the tattooer's ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, you know, that gets on there and writes a bad review just to be vindictive. I mean, you can do that nowadays. So
right. Yeah. No, I'm in the flooring business, a trade.
Right.
And it's the same type of thing. You can do 100 really nice jobs and have people review your stuff, and you screw up on one job.
That's right.
And
changes
you know,
everything.
oh yeah, people badmouth you or give you a bad review or whatever, and no matter how hard you try to take care of some customers,
it just happens.
It comes back and bites you.
And
And when you're working with the public, you're going to have. we're going to have problems,
Right.
and sometimes it's just a personality clash, and other times you did screw up.
Right,
You know, I'm not
exactly.
going to say I never screwed up on
Yeah.
anything.
Oh, I
you know,
can't say that
and
either.
didn't
I don't wanna
deserve
say that I have,
didn't
but-
deserve an unhappy customer.
We all make mistakes.
So-
Tattooing is like can be a very, drastic mistake if you make one. So
Right.
and it goes back to where apprenticeship is good, because you've got somebody there guiding you and all that. I think some people don't, the I want it right now generation doesn't want to wait out the 2 years and doesn't want to quite, go through that whole thing. And I ask a lot of those people, well, what would you do if you were wanting to become a lineman or a pipe fitter or, whatever, because their apprenticeships are 4 years.
Right.
And they, and then like people have complained about the hazing in tattoo apprenticeships. Well, you get into the military, you get hazed. You get hazed to get into a fraternity or sorority. I mean, if you're want to be an electrician, you're going to get hazed a little bit. They're going to test your metal, and and people, I've heard that's one of the complaints. Oh, you're just there to be a slave. You're just there to be, clean up all the time. Well, of course, yeah, because you got to learn that keeping the shop clean is important.
I've got a book from the early 1900s that has an apprenticeship agreement in it.
Oh yeah.
And you basically agreed to sell your soul
Pretty much,
to that master.
Yeah.
But at
We
the
still-
end of
I
the
still
2
do.
years, he was supposed to have you trained to be
Yep, that's
be
it.
a journeyman in whatever
Right,
it was.
exactly.
And there was an agreement there, and he used you for mopping the floors or cleaning the scraps or I
exactly.
mean that was your job, but in the
Exactly.
process of
But you also got to
learned.
watch. You got to
watch, you got to
That-
learn, you got hands on, and it could have been pretty task mastery, whatever.
Oh yeah,
but,
some of them were.
but at the same time, sometimes the hardest taskmaster creates the best journeyman.
Right, exactly. The guy who brought me into tattooing was an old carny tattooer, so I never got the real strict, we need to keep things clean aspect of it so much, because he was a carny tattooer. But then when I met the old man, and when he took me under his wing, and I call him my adopted dad because that's basically what he was, he kind of changed a lot of that stuff, and kind of showed me some newer ways to do things and to get on top. But he used to do this one thing that was just, everybody thought, oh, what an asshole for him doing this. But what he would do is he'd tell you, go in and clean the bathroom, and he'd have you go in and clean the bathroom up and get everything nice and tidy and everything, and I clean the bathroom, and then he would go in and to use the bathroom, and he'd piss on the back of the seat and lit a little bit and get a little on the floor, and then he'd wash his hands and splash water all over and throw the paper towel on the floor, and then he'd go back out and he'd say, you didn't clean that bathroom, get back in there and clean it. And you go in and you'd be like, you dirty old, you just, God, I just cleaned this, right? And so then you'd have to clean it again. And it was actually a lesson. It was teaching you that anybody can go into your bathroom at any time and piss all over the seat and splash water everywhere and leave paper towels on the floor and whatever, and you have to be able to keep in mind that can happen at any time, and that a clean bathroom is important. Because people ask me, well, how do you tell if it's a good tattoo shop or not? And I always say, well, look at their portfolio and all that and see if they've got good work. Like you said, ask around and see if they've got good reputation and whatnot. I said, but if you really are concerned about cleanliness in any way, I said, use the bathroom. I said, if the bathroom isn't clean, then the rest of the place isn't going to be clean. Because, somebody who's going to take time to, and really, if you're going to take all the time to be anal to keep all your stuff in your work area clean and all that stuff and do the whole process right, why would you leave your bathroom a mess? Somebody who's going to be that meticulous about, cleanliness is definitely going to keep the bathroom clean. So
Good point.
yeah, I tell people that all the time. Just look at the bathroom. If the bathroom looks horrible, then if the sink is brown because nobody's washed it in 8 months, unless it's supposed to be a brown sink, and then
Right.
But yeah, so that's kind of the thing. Here's these bell mechanisms that I was talking about. And,
Now, how old are some of these?
these ones, this goes back, I think this guy right here goes back to the 20s, because I took it out of a house that I used to
And they're still bells. They haven't been converted over
they haven't been
tattoo machines.
No, they haven't been converted over to
And
tattoo
you've got
machines.
probably 10 or 12 of those there.
Yep, and a picture of one of the patents. And what I like about that is you can compare, you can look at this patent and you can look at this patent and you can go, wow, there's similarities. And you can look at the bells and the way that they're set up, there's a lot of similarities as well.
And we're looking at a case here that's got probably 25 different tattoo machines from
I think you're dead
the
on.
20s, the 50s.
Yep, 20s is the oldest.
And they've got the same dual
magnet,
coil
yeah.
mechanism that the old doorbells used to have.
Yep, exactly. And so if you look at it's just a flip over. It's almost exactly
Right.
the same thing. It's just flipped over.
And where the little dinger is where the needle comes down
so
and makes
the armature
contact.
here, and you got the armature here, and so the needle would affix here, and people would, when they modified them, would chop this off and affix the needle there, and then they would use the frame of this, and they would cut all the rest of that out of there, and then they would affix a handpiece onto it so that they could hold it, and boom, there you go, you got a tattoo machine. The difference was the frame was on the other side. I don't remember how I had her.
Wow.
And this device right here kind of is a better one for the example all around of that. You can see that the frame on that, you see the frame
Right.
on that is very similar to a tattoo machine frame, even if we went to one of these more
It almost looks
complex
identical.
ones. You can see, like this is a perfect example right here. It's almost like a mirror image of it. And then, so very similar concept. Yeah, very similar concept. They're based on the same principle: a set of contact points, an armature bar, 2 inline electromagnets, and then the frame being the ground, the coils being the positive part. You hit power to it, it charges the coils, it pulls the armature bar down, it breaks the contact at the contact point, turns everything off, bounces back up, and just repeats the cycle, recycles over and over again, about 100 cycles per second. So
Per second or per minute?
per second.
Per second.
Yeah. So
Wow.
within a minute, you're getting 6,000
Yeah. Wow.
punctures. So yeah, it's
That's a lot. That almost seems like it'd be hard to control as far as.
No, because in the handpiece, everything's is held really in place perfectly and with a certain amount of tension and all that. So it really isn't that hard.
And how did you feed the needle? Was there a ink reservoir in these
No,
things?
but
Or you
no,
just-
but there was a guy who tried to patent a thing like that, and I have a book full of patent drawings, but I don't have it here. Where the guy had come up with a system that was like a gravity feed, and so it would feed from the back of your machine, and it would feed down inside the tube, and do the ink that way. The best way, I guess, to explain how the ink and all that works is you can see Richard doing it right here. He's got ink cups out there, and then his machine's all set up, and so just like a pen, like a quill pen or whatever, or a paintbrush and paints, you dip in like he just did, and then it has a bit of a reservoir there, and then the pigment sits in, or the ink sits
Just
in
like the old fountain pens.
in the reservoir, and then the needles move through it. So, so that's where you get your control and everything, and that's how you get your ink in, is because they're in caps. And then those repetitions being as fast as they are actually is what makes that,
And it looks like he's kind of fanning it when he's
just
putting
like
it on.
just like a paintbrush, and the way you use
And because of the number of needle strikes that it's
Right,
making, it paints it in just as fast as
as you
a
can
paintbrush.
as you can paintbrush. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's actually, he's working about as fast as he would on paper.
And the tattoo he's doing is just unbelievable. He's doing an awesome job on that.
Isn't that nice?
It is.
Really, really nice. But seeing him work, you can kind of get an idea of that. How if you were doing that one poke at a time, poke,
Right.
poke, 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 poke.
Oh, I can't-
Poke, and he's like, it would take you, to do a line, say 2 inches long, with the hand poke method. You're taking, it might take you a minute and a half to do that. A 2-inch line with a tattoo machine take 10 seconds.
Yeah.
So, depending on how the line is, but you can move so much faster. So something that would have taken 2 hours now can be done, like I said, in 45 minutes, in full color and everything, and just beautiful as can be. So whatever it was, whether it was that autographic marker or the doorbell mechanism or whatever it was the game changer. Just turned the whole thing into a different world. Because you got speed behind it and versatility. It's a lot easier to use something that's like a pen than it is to use something that's
that you're trying to jab.
poke with. And if you've got something
well,
like
and
this,
your accuracy would be so much greater because you could take and make a flow line versus trying to stab. And as your hand was moving, you'd be all over the place.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow.
This is one of my babies. Some of these machines are. Well, this one is, they have machines what they call on this day and age the Holy Grail machines, which are the ones that every collector, museum owner, or tattooer would love to have in their hands or in their collection. And so I've slowly but surely been going through and trying to get as many of those Holy Grail machines as I can. It's a lot harder than, they're used to be before tattooing got as popular as it was, that you could find an old tattoo machine and it would be somebody just didn't want it anymore, or it was just thrown in the wayside or whatever, and it was old, so we don't want that old tattoo machine. Well, I'll buy it for you for a couple $100, So a machine like this, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you probably could have got for $200-300. Well, now it's $2,000-3,000. Because
I would when you're saying $200 or $300, I'm going for an old tattoo machine.
That's what we used to say, because it was an old tattoo machine, and then historical significance jumped in there, and then the amount of tattooers rose, and now everybody wants a little piece.
Right.
And so the older guys that are retiring that have all these pieces are going, wow, I'm in high demand now. I'm gonna, the market's gone up, but just like with anything.
Right.
And then you got rarity. They may have made, I have one machine in here that there may only be 200 of in the world in existence, So, and then other machines like the one I'm holding in my hand, I'm sure there were hundreds and hundreds of them made, and they were all over the world, but they wound up in attics or basements or old boxes or in the landfill or whatever, because nobody knew what to do with them. So there's not as many surviving examples.
The thing that's sad is I could have one of those sitting someplace and not even know what the heck it was.
Yeah. Well, some people do in their barns and whatnot, and in their attics, and who knows? You could be in the attic of a house that a tattoo artist owned at one point in time and not even know. I've always wanted to, and I think I still will. I want to put a trunk together and throw 4 or 5 machines that I built in there, and a bunch of bottles of ink, and a bunch of flash that I drew, and other production stuff and whatnot, and just throw a power supply and just a basic traveling get up and putting it in the attic of my house, and when we move, leaving it there. And see what happens after I'm dead and gone. See if it comes unearthed and if it winds up in a museum or something.
Right.
I always thought it would be kind of a.
If somebody'd even know what it was when they opened up the
box.
Or,
Totally.
Yeah. Well, because like I said, I don't know much about tattooing or anything, and I'm actually involved in a lot of different mechanical type things. But if I ran across one of these, I'd be totally dumbfounded as to what the heck I was even looking at.
Well, not anymore.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. You're right. I'm educating myself a little bit by a little bit, but
not anymore.
But you've got on this wall here, you've got several different artists that you've got highlighted as far as who they were, and they must be some of the more famous tattoo artists.
Yes, some of them are. Grumble in the microphone. I just put this new lighting in here, and it keeps coming undone. At least it keeps everything lit very well. So, one thing about this new, this is our our third location, but this is the second location in Coeur d'Alene, and we were in a really small spot before, and it had low ceilings on it, and it was only 475 square feet, and this new location here is just under 1,600 square feet. So, and then we have 18-foot tall ceilings in here. So, this display case was lit so much better because the lights were lower and everything was, And then we got in here, and if the lights aren't on, you can, it's really hard. You got to really get in there. So, the other day I went,
Well, you've got
"They
this one lit up really
they
nice
got
with
those
those
cool,
little LEDs, yeah.
They got those cool little LED kits," and I went and got a couple of those and threw them in there, and it changed the whole thing. But yeah, I kind of laid the place out to where it's got different, you know, sections to it. This of course here is pretty much the machine section, and then there's a case back here behind it that has more tattoo machines, and then I have some more back over here. And then like this section in the corner, well, we've got the women in tattooing exhibit.
And let's talk about the women in tattooing. We were talking about that a little bit when we first came in before we started the podcast.
Right.
But you've got this display coming up with women in tattooing. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about this display.
Well, it was actually my wife kind of had a bit to do with that. She's an archaeologist and anthropologist, and she only has a handful of tattoos. So, but she said to me, she knows a lot of people in tattooing and whatnot. Us being together for 16 years now, so she knows people in the trade and whatnot, and she sees what I'm doing here, and she helps out, you know, from time to time. So she said, you know, you ought to do an exhibit on women in tattooing, you know, and you could be just a pictorial thing. You could, you know, do whatever. We have this display deal that we could put it on. And I went, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. And so I started working on it. Actually, I've only been working on it for a couple of weeks now. And right now I think there's 75 photos, and it covers several different aspects of tattooing. That women, it's all pretty much 60s and back kind of thing. So more about the sideshow, some prominent figures, a lot about the tattooed women, the different tattooed women that were out there. Of course, Olive Oatman, just because that's a really interesting story about her, the massacre and the abduction, and then her being assimilated to the Mojave tribe and getting their traditional tattoos and whatnot, and all that, and then going back into Western society and all that, and kind of taking that with her. So it's a very interesting story.
Now, he did say Olive Oatman,
Yep,
and
Olive
that's a very interesting story. Look it up on the internet, read through it. There's been
She's on
several books.
Wikipedia.
There's been several books written, and the story is just extremely interesting with the whole set of circumstances there.
I think you can find about Olive Oatman and then the Oatman massacre on Wikipedia. Those are both two sources that have, you know, a fair decent amount of information. And so I wasn't thinking about this before, but how she was abducted and all that, and she wasn't forcibly tattooed. You know, she was
assimilating
into the tribe.
It
was part of the deal. Women, you know, got these tattoos, and they got them so that their ancestors would recognize them in the afterlife, kind of thing. And they were, you know, a lot of tribes used them for spirit guides, totems, different things like that. But one of the funny things is because I've incorporated in this exhibit different tattooed ladies, sideshow attractions and whatnot. I have Gita Salome over here.
Let's talk about Gina.
Gita Salome.
Gita, okay,
Yep,
that's spelled D-J-D-I-T-A,
Yep.
S-O-L-O-M-E.
Yep. And so her real name was Paula Emmer Reinhold, and she was German. She claimed to be Egyptian as a part of her sideshow things, that she was Egyptian, not German. And she called herself Gita Salome, La Salome, just Salome. You know, she had different little. The Blue Woman was another one of her titles that she had, and one of her, as many of the tattooed attractions did, back in the early, you know, teens and whatnot, teens and 20s, 1920s. One of the stories was that they were captured by wild red Indians and forcibly tattooed, and that's how they got their whole body covered. And so you could tell, I mean, that whole thing would be discredited the minute that you actually really started taking a look at her tattoos. You would notice that, you know, Prince whatever from wherever, you know, the whatever of Germany is definitely not something that wild Indians would tattoo on you.
No.
Nor would they be tattooing roses or European flags or, you know, any of those other things. But as a sell for the sideshow, that's a great story. But yeah, she was in the height of things in the 1920s. She was making in her tours in the United States. She was making $250 a week, which in nowadays money would be about $7,000 a week.
Wow.
To be a sideshow.
To be a sideshow attraction.
Right. For people to just to come in and take a look and maybe be able to buy a pitch card or whatever.
Wow.
And so
her tattoos really paid off.
They really paid off. And it was actually one of the things I read about her is that she would pay if somebody came along with a new color that she didn't have tattooed in her, she would pay handsomely to have that color tattooed on her. Wow. On her suit. So she would pay really well, like if you had a blue that she didn't have. And so in the beginning she said that there were that she was tattooed in 7 colors, and by the end it was 14.
Wow.
Colors by the end, and that wasn't an exaggeration. I mean, that she truly was tattooed by that many people. I've always thought that one of her maybe one of the things that pushed her to take the name, because it's a biblical name, was the fact that the actual Salome, who was the the daughter of Herod II and Herodias, did the dance for King Herod, the dance of the 7 veils, and he was willing to give up his up to half of his kingdom, whatever she asked, because he was so entranced. And then his mother asked her, or her mother asked her to ask him for the head of John the Baptist on a plate, and so that's kind of how that all came about. And that whole story, that whole biblical story, inspired a lot of poetry and music and paintings and things like that. And there was an artist who actually did a depiction of the tattooed Salome, and that picture is right here.
Okay.
It shows her, very, very scantily clad,
right,
kind of dancing with tattoos on her. And so that might be because that painting, and it was done by a French painter, that might be part of the reason that she picked up that name. And so, because I mean, the New Testament Salome was really, or rather, there were 2 of them, but the one that asked for John the Baptist's head on a plate, it instilled the, maybe the femme fatale, there's just all these things that associated to that. So I think that painting might have had something to do with, her
why
being
she
up. There's
took
not a
that
lot
name.
of information that's like, there's not a book written on her. It's very, there's just enough there to get the gist of it. But there was another Salome in the scripture too, that was one of the women that was at the crucifixion and was at the tomb on the resurrection day too. So I don't know if that had any influence on her taking that name either, because they referred to her as Salome, or Mary Salome, who was the mother of 2 of the 12 disciples. So who knows what the real reason why she picked up that name was. I kind of like to think that it's because of the John the Baptist Dance of the 7 Veils kind of deal. So there's I did a focus on her because that's a really an interesting bit there.
Something else you pointed out was that, like on Olive Oatman, there's been several books written.
Right.
And you said for this display, you had to go through all kinds of information,
right,
and try and reduce it down to like 4 paragraphs to where the story's condensed. And you were saying it's
the hardest part of curation. It is the hardest part about putting anything together in a museum. I mean, putting the photos up and things like that are real easy. Putting the narratives that go along with them can be difficult, especially with me. I'm somebody who will talk forever, so that kind of rolls over into
Right.
You know, trying to write a narrative, you know, and I have to go back through and all of Oatman was, you know, there's a lot of information on her.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it was a lot harder to write about her than it was Salome. It was a lot easier to write about her.
Because you didn't have 5 books.
There wasn't 5 books, and it was neat because there was a biblical, you know,
Right.
deal. So I got
Connection.
to write half of that on the biblical sense of it, you know.
Right.
And then there are some that are really well documented. I'm working on Artoria Gibbons here, and she was like a tattooed lady from 1919 to 1980 something. Whoa, it's bad. I don't remember. There we go. From 1919 to 1981.
Huh.
Her husband. She was a husband, and her husband Red Gibbons. They traveled the carnival circuit together and did the museums and all that, and had tattoo shops and all that. And so Artoria was the sideshow attraction, and Red was the tattooer. So she would do the, you know, basically, and a lot of times tattooed women, their job was to sit on a stool and just let people look at their tattoos, or, you know, stand there on the stage and turn and let everybody, you know, see their, and that was that. And then if somebody was really interested in tattoos, well, then they could cut through this way, and, you know, her husband, the tattoo guy, would do his tattooing. And sometimes in the 10-in-1 tents, they'd actually just have a guy tattooing. So, you know, in between acts, there'd be a guy, you know, a tattoo setup. So it was really interesting. There's another gal that I have over here, and I haven't finished the narratives on, Stella Grassman. And so there was Deffy and Stella Grassman, and that was a couple, and they tattooed together. And same thing, they did the sideshow thing. They were both attractions, and then later on they wound up settling down and actually having street shops as well. But a lot of people did do the carnival circuit in tattooing. A lot of early tattooing, a lot of guys who are women that, and it was male dominated back then, who did the tattooing. But a lot of times the woman attraction, you know, the tattooed lady, her husband was a tattoo artist, and so it was his work that she was wearing in a lot of cases. So they kind of worked as teams. And Deffy and Stella did the same thing. And there's a whole, I mean, I could go on and on about the groups of people that have done that team deal. But there were tattoo artists that were just like the tattooed man, or the strong man, or a tattooed acrobat. A guy named Paul Rogers was that, and they consider him one of the fathers of American tattooing. And he did all kinds of things, but he was an acrobat in the circus. He was the tattooed man in the circus. He was the strong man, and then he tattooed. But this guy, he was all over the place. He traveled a bunch. He tattooed by day and worked the cotton mills by night certain seasons.
Wow.
When he wasn't on the road with the circus. And his wife that he married, Paul's wife Helen, her father owned a sideshow, a traveling sideshow. So that's where they met, was on the circus circuit. And at the time he was a tattoo man and an acrobat. And so you know, the daughter of the carnival, you know, they fall in love, and so they did the sideshows together. And so during the season they did that, and then on off season he would tattoo it at night, and then they would work the cotton mills. So
Wow.
really wild, huh?
I was going to say busy people.
Yes. Well, and sometimes you didn't, you know, you had to have something else.
Right.
You know, all the way up into the 70s and 80s. I mean, you sometimes had to have a second, you know, job or whatever, because like I remember when I first got into it, there weren't that many tattoo shops. So finding an empty chair somewhere was, you know, hit and miss. So sometimes you had to do other things to make a living. You know?
I think not the tattoo shops, the sideshows were pretty much gone when I was growing up.
Yeah,
I can't remember
that's
going
all
to a
gone.
carnival and ever
Carnivals
seeing
are-
a sideshow.
Yeah, the 10-in-1 thing went away in the 50s.
Yeah.
It started to die out in the 50s. That was as soon as television came along, the need to go see the oddities at the sideshow became less and less. And then they even had museums, oddity museums, which they still have some of those around. There's one in
The
Venice.
Ripley's, believe it or not, kind
yeah.
of bases itself
Yeah,
on
well,
that.
they
That's
had
kind of a
they had
national
ones.
chain. But
What's his name? Barnum.
Right.
P.T. Barnum's museum in New York. You know, he had a there, and he had tattoo attractions there, and the three-legged boy and the dog-faced girl and all that stuff. But it was just, it's in a set place, you know. And Coney Island had stuff like that too, where it came off of the traveling circuit, you know, and it was more circus, it was more the fun for kids and all that, because folks could go home and watch their TV.
Right.
You know, and they
and
didn't
now
necessarily
you don't
need,
see people going out and doing anything.
People don't even go to the circus anymore. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey folded up, 3-4 years ago, and that was the end of that. And that was the end of an immense era of, and you know, talk about history. I mean, that's gone, and that's sad because they were
just community events and stuff, you know, have suffered greatly because of so much entertainment that you don't have to leave your house to do.
You don't have to
and it's sad that people don't get out and do things like they used to. I mean, communities, I think, have suffered, but also history. When you look at your museum here, this thing's not a monstrous museum, but it's packed. I mean, you've got a lot of stuff, a lot of history in here.
Well, I can put up more. I mean, I can go all the way to the ceiling.
There's a lot of history here, and there's a lot of history in all these museums, but I don't think the museums are getting the walkthrough that they should be getting.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I think people don't, well, they either don't know, because the museums are in obscure places, and I think there's a certain type of person who likes to go out and seek out those things. Like my wife and I, we're always, you know, if we go
that's
somewhere,
us. This is why we're doing these podcasts.
Right,
I'm trying to get people to maybe stop at some of these things.
Yeah.
Because, we just stopped at the $50,000
silver dollar bar, which is more like the 100 and something thousand silver.
Well, it's up to 77,000 now or something.
Oh, it's more.
They've got a tally going on the wall.
Oh, do they have it?
77,000.
Because I've got like 6 of them on there.
Well, we put one on there today,
and I've got
too.
ones. Well, and they only mount those every so often.
Right.
So like when they get to a certain number, and then they go through and bore out the holes and put the dollars in, and then they, you know, put the names on there and all that. But I actually, we used to go through there every year on the way to the Sturgis rally to tattoo there, and so we'd stop there to have a drink, you know, at the silver dollar bar. And so every year, you know, I'll buy one I've got one for my wife and I got one for my wife, I got one for me, I got one for the old man, I got one for the tattoo shop, I got one for, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's just like they're all a whole bunch of them over the years.
But that's a really fascinating place that people just drive by, you know?
Drive right by there.
You don't have to stop for very long, but their gift shop, I was amazed at how reasonably priced a lot of their items were and stuff. You know, it was just a cool little shop.
Yeah, tourist trap.
Well, it is a tourist trap,
but it's a neat one.
But it is a neat one.
I mean, especially going in there and seeing all those silver dollars. I mean, that's kind of a real treat, seeing that much, you know, silver in one place. You know. And
but like this museum, you know, learning about the history and you know, all of that kind of stuff, seeing the things that you've got here. This is a neat place. This is a place that people ought to stop at. It's easy to find. I mean, we found it within probably 10 minutes of getting off the interstate.
Yeah, it's a lot easier here than our old location. Our old location was
you know, and it's a
lot harder to find.
Great place, and you've been super to do this podcast with.
Oh,
I appreciate your time so much, Jay.
Absolutely. I could go on for hours.
I'm sure you could.
I could literally go on for hours.
I'm definitely a little bit more educated on tattoos than what I was, and hopefully people will really enjoy the show.
Yeah, I hope so too.
I usually finish out by saying the world is full of wonders. Get out and explore.
There you go.
And have a wonder-filled day.
There you go. That's awesome.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?